It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back to Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the Commander in front of us on a budget on my quest out brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As well as I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. We're rocking through week 2 of Spider-Man content, and today we're covering some interesting commanders, mainly the ones from the scene boxes, but today we're looking at Kraven the Hunter. 3-mana Golgari, 4/3 with Trample. It says whenever a creature an opponent controls with the greatest power among creatures that player controls dies, we're going to draw a card and put a counter on Kraven. And I actually really like Kraven as an idea for a commander. You're going to be trying to kill, right, to destroy your opponent's, highest power creatures among they control. No, that doesn't say ties. It has to be greatest. So if your opponent has a bunch of 1/1s, no, then we're not going to get it. What I think is really interesting about Kraven is we're going to pack a lot of removal, which means hopefully we're going to be really able to deal with and counterplay, right, our opponent's threats and not let them keep their things down. The hope here, right, is that you grow Kraven and that Kraven becomes a threat. But I think at minimum we're going to do a great job at just keeping our opponents at bay, really focusing on hitting, their pieces and their things, and, keep our opponents down as we can hopefully set something up for ourselves. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit earlier for just $1 a month, consider checking that out down below. Well, all right. When we talk about removal or things dying, I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it. And basically what I tried to do was give us access to a suite of single target and mass removal that's going to take care of that. What do I mean by that? Well, you have things like both our Garricks here that have -3s that just destroy target creatures. So this can go after any creature we want it to, right? Killing that creature, right? Garrick, Apex gains life, Curse Huntsman draws us a card. So that's just single target. Where you have something like Professor Onyx, her -3 just says each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls. Well, that's great. That completely is going to trigger Kraven multiple times. But the point is that I think you can start to see single target versus mass. And that's kind of what, honestly, almost all of our removal is going to come down to. Kogla fighting something on enter, Royal Assassin destroying target tap creature. Contest of Claws lets a creature we control deal damage equal to its power to another target creature, and then if it deals excess damage, we get to discover X, where X is that excess damage. But the important thing about these bite and fight spells is that most of the time it's going to be Kraven. Kraven's going to be the biggest thing we have. It's going to have counters on it, and we'll talk about how we're going to take advantage of the counters later. But Kraven's our main target for things like Contest of Claws. But we do have some things like Kogla and some other larger creatures that can stand in for Kraven when it comes to these bite or fight type spells. Extracted Convention just has each opponent sacrifice a creature, but if we actually collect evidence 6, they have to sacrifice the creature with the greatest power. Remember, collect evidence is exiling cards with total mana value that much or greater from our graveyard. So hopefully the Extracted Confession isn't the first thing we play, right? And we can exile some things from our graveyard to make it better. Gix's Command has the bottom ability that each opponent has to sack the creature with the highest power among creatures they control. But Gix's Command does also add the fun ability to destroy each creature with power 2 or less. So if you're playing against a tokens deck or a go wide deck, something like that, maybe Gix's Command can be the best of both worlds, knocking out the low and the high. But the other option for Gix's Command is the top one, putting 2 counters on a creature and having it get lifelink till the turn. This could be nice on Kraven, right? Getting it a couple of counters higher and then getting you a nice life gain. Maybe it's 7, 8, 9 life that turn, which could help keep us alive and keep the party rolling, right? Will of the Absence, same thing. Any number of target opponents each sacrifice a creature with the greatest power among creatures they controls and loses 3 life, so kind of interesting. And then if we have Kraven out, right, we can return a creature card from your graveyard back to the battlefield if we want to. But again, the important point is that top one. Assassin's Trophy, Beast Within can be used on creatures, but they can also be used on non-creature permanents as well. I think it's very easy to just want to point all of our removal at creatures, since that's what Kraven cares about. But you do have to remember that some of the best cards in our format are not creatures. They're artifacts, they're enchantments. And so I think we need to make sure we're diversifying our removal, even though most of our removal really wants to be on creatures. so that we can take care of those threats, because there are going to be the decks that do not care about creatures. All they care about is value enchantments, artifacts, things like that. And if we can't find a way to deal with them, then we're going to have a really tough time. And the really nice part is that black, right, as a color, is not generally very good at dealing with enchantments, but they're very good at dealing with creatures. But green is very good at dealing with permanents and enchantments. So we get to kind of smash the two colors together and get a lot of the black removal for the creatures and a lot of the green removal for other artifacts and enchantments, which is why you get a spell like Assassin's Trophy in white. It's so good. Bite Down, again, just a bite spell. Having our creature we control deal damage equal to its power to target creature we don't control. Again, Kraven's ability doesn't care how the creature dies, it just cares that it dies. So if we can take advantage of those bite spells, I think it makes a ton of sense. Cosmic Hunger, same thing. Death Sprout says we destroy target creature, and then we can go search for a basic land and put on the battlefield tapped. You pay a little bit more for that single target removal, but you're getting a land out of it, which could be important depending on what stage of the game you're in. Fleur of Malice, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with greatest mana value among creatures they control. So it's not guaranteed technically to be the highest power, but I think there's a lot of scenarios where it's most likely to be the case. And so I think it's still worth playing. We can also really just hurt our opponents by doing this, right? Even if it doesn't trigger Kraven, I think removing our opponent's pieces is still the whole point of the game if we're going to use removal. And number two, the point of our game plan. Our game plan is purposely to hurt our opponents, to push them back in their game plans. And so even if we have removal that's not necessarily triggering Kraven, right, like Beast Within or Assassin's Trophy, if we target an artifact or enchantment, I still think it's well within what our deck wants to do, right? And it's important to have that access there. Overkill, giving that big toughness debuff to a creature. Remember, if a creature ever goes to 0 or below toughness, they automatically die. Shoot the Sheriff, destroying a non-outlaw creature. Ram through, again, another bite spell, but if we have excess damage go through and the creature has trample, we actually get to deal it to the creature's controller instead. Snuff Out can destroy target non-black creature, and we can actually play it for just 4 life if we control a swamp. Soul Shatter and Zot's Will, again, hitting each opponent for the highest mana value and then the highest creature or the power here on Zat's Will. So again, just more examples of this mass removal. Vonus Hunger may not look as obvious, right? Because it's not actually dealing with the greatest power in specific, but it says, well, just for 3 mana, each opponent's going to sacrifice a creature. But if we have the City's Blessing, they sacrifice half the creatures they control rounded up. And again, I think this is one of those scenarios where the 3 mana may not hit the highest power creature, but if you can just have someone's board, especially if they have 2, key creatures they really need, I think it's still worth the mana, and I think it's still worth the removal. Meltstrider's Resolve comes in and has the creature fight the creature an opponent controls. Again, great for Kraven. And then, gives Kraven a little toughness buff. And then Nowhere to Run comes in, gives a little bit of mini removal. But the key part of Nowhere to Run is the bottom ability. Creatures our opponents control can be the targets of spells and abilities as though they didn't have hexproof, and ward doesn't trigger. This is a really, really positive ability, because one of the hardest parts of a deck like ours is that almost all of our removal, it isn't mass removal, right, is going to be forced to target. So how are we going to get around creatures with hexproof and ward? Well, things like Nowhere to Run. Now, the deck doesn't play something like Shadow Spear, which is another way to do that. It's just a very expensive equipment. But if you notice a lot of this right at the table you're playing at, maybe it makes sense to look for more of these abilities that can shut down that ability. Okay, well, we've gone on and on about removal, right? And we could go on even more about removal. There's a lot of great removal in our 2 colors, but how do we care about it? Well, you have something like Driven Out that just doubles all triggered abilities you control from a creature dying. That's Kraven's ability and a lot of other abilities. Morbid Opportunist draws us a card once per turn whenever one of our creatures die. Vincent gets counters on it equal to the creature's power whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, and it can flip over into a nice threat on the back. Vraska the Silencer, whenever another non-token creature an opponent controls dies, we could pay 1. If we do, we get it back onto the battlefield under our control tapped, and it becomes a treasure and loses all other card types. So it still retains its ability, and it becomes a treasure, and it stops our opponents from getting it back, which is a very interesting ability. The Masamune says if a creature dying causes a trigger ability of this creature and an emblem you own to trigger goes off an additional time. So we attach this to Kraven, and Kraven's ability is going to go off twice. And then Eternal Thirst, whenever the creature opponent controls dies, you put a counter on this creature. Again, great for Kraven and gives him lifelink, right? So now we're gaining life back. But I think the other thing to mention with Kraven, right, is Kraven's putting counters on it, right? So we could still take advantage of things like Corpse Jack's Menace and Winding Constrictor and Earth Crystal that all double the number of counters, Corpse Jack and Earth Crystal double. Winding Constrictor just adds one to the number of counters that go on Kraven. That is technically important. I know that some people are going to say, well, we're only putting one counter on Kraven at a time. What is the difference between adding one and doubling the matter? The difference is we're in a deck that's only adding one counter to Kraven at a time. If you were in a deck that could add multiple counters at the same time, the difference between twice and +1 is huge, right? So yeah, and most of the time, these are going to be functionally equivalent, but it's important to remember that if we have another doubler sitting alongside the +1, we could +1 and then double, right? And so then you get more counters right out of it, as opposed to doubling and then adding one, or just having, two doublers, right? So you can start to see where the effects matter when you start stacking them together. So branching evolution, hardened scales, right? More of these abilities to increase the number of counters. The other important thing here, right, is that then we need less counters to make Kraven a threat. If we have 2 opponents' creatures dies with a hardened scales out, that's 4 counters instead of 2. Now Kraven's an 8 instead of 6, and you can start to see where you're going to start to snowball away. But one of the biggest problems with counters decks, and one of the hardest parts about setting up one of these, types of strategies, is when Kraven dies or gets exiles, the counters go away, right? And so that's why the Ozolith is such a good card, especially in a deck like this, because it says whenever a creature we control leaves the battlefield and counters on it, you put it on the Ozolith. And then at the start of combat at our turn, we can put all the counters on the Ozolith onto a creature. This is a huge deal because then when Kraven inevitably gets removed, and it will get removed, a lot of people are going to see exactly what you're trying to do, and they're going to go after Kraven. The counters go on the Ozolith, and then the next time Kraven's out, it gets the counters back, and then Kraven becomes even more of a threat because it's retaining those counters right from every time that it's gone away. Innkeeper's Talent gives a creature a counter at the start of each of our combats. Level 2 lets us add Ward 1, which is nice. Ward 1 is better than nothing, and most of the time it can stop you. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times in the games that I see, people are only leaving up enough removal to pay the 1 for swords or pay the 1s for path, right? So Ward 1's a huge deal if your opponent only left up the 1 mana, and now they can't target Kraven. And then if you get Innkeeper's Talent up to level 3, you're actually going to go ahead and get the doubling effect on Innkeeper's Talent. And then Terra Symbiosis, the first time a counter to be put on a creature we control, we draw that many cards, do this once each turn. Terra Symbiosis might seem odd because you're like, well, Mills, you're only putting 1 counter on at a time, potentially, the first time each turn. Well, that's not a lot of card draw. But remember that a lot of our removal's at instant speed, right? And in fact, we want to be reactive with our removal, right? The important thing about Terra Symbiosis is that it's once each turn, not once during each of our turns, meaning that Terra Symbiosis can actually draw us cards on everyone's turn as long as we're putting a counter on Kraven or getting a counter on him. I don't expect that to happen. I think realistically, you're probably going to get 2 cards per turn cycle, 1 on our turn and probably 1 on an opponent's turn. But hey, that's 2 cards more than we had, and I think that's important to remember on the back end, as we're thinking about setting up value. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again, no deck's ever complete. This is our first shot at Kraven, and I think going into testing, I think the answer I asked myself is, do we have enough removal? Consumed by Greed was a removal spell I looked at. Binding the Old Gods was another removal spell I looked at. Something that can hit more non-land permanents. I'm kind of worried that a lot of my removal is pushed too hard at creatures, and we're probably inevitably going to get in trouble from an artifact or enchantment deck. So maybe you look into things like Abrupt Decay or Putrefy, or more spells like Krosan Grip that deal with more permanents instead of just one thing. And that's something that, truthfully, I can't say on paper, because a lot of it comes down to what pod you're in and what you draw, right? But it's important to keep that in the back of your mind, and it's something you could think about. My other thought was something like Cleopatra. So at the beginning of your end step, you can put a counter on each of up to 2 other target legendary creatures. Great. Counters can go on Kraven. And then whenever a legend with counters on it dies, you draw a card for each counter on it, you lose 2 life. This seems huge, especially if someone wants to get rid of Kraven, since Kraven's the whole point of our deck. Drawing 4 and losing 2, drawing 3 and losing 2 seems like a great ability to add on top of it. Truthfully, I just wasn't really quite sure where to put the the ratios on stuff in the deck, because like you want to see enough removal to always be able to trigger Kraven as long as you have the mana. But I was like, how many other creatures do I want in the deck? How many, support pieces do I want in the deck? How much do I want to care about counters? I really wasn't quite sure, but I think Cleopatra is one of those cards I'd probably consider bringing in, because I think it really helps Kraven not feel so fleeting sometimes, and probably help us in the long run. Well, let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what hands we're looking to keep and how we're going to set up our game plan. Now, I got to give a caveat in a deck like this where I can't simulate what my opponents are doing. So if I end my turn with 3 mana up and I keep a 3 mana removal spell up, that's all I can really do in a playtest, right? Because I don't know what my opponents have. I don't know what my target is. I think when you're playtesting a deck like this, you need to practice leaving mana up and then trying to look out, right, for what's the best target for your thing. So here we got a 4-lander with that Rot Farm, which will get us up to 5. Reanimate, there's a Karsi Revenant. Might look odd, but it's a 3/3 with some fun abilities. Then if it gets into the yard, we can exile it to put counters of its abilities onto Kraven. So we can give Kraven Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink 3 great abilities. And then there's the Morbid Opportunist. So again, I think we're probably just going to build our board up. Remember, Kraven is 3 mana. So I think we're just building our way up to Kraven. Now we draw a couple interesting creatures. We see Shieldred, so whenever it comes in, each opponent has to sacrifice a non-token creature. Again, not guaranteed that it's going to hit the highest power among creatures they control, but a lot of tokens decks, right, the only non-token creatures they have tend to be some of their higher stuff. So here's where we can start leaving up some removal. We have these bite spells, right? We can go for Karsi, but it's going to basically ruin our... it's going to basically, we wouldn't have enough mana left for any of our bites. But right now, we have enough mana up for both of them. So we could ideally pass and then try to do these on our opponent's turns to get counters on Kraven and then draw cards. Remember, Kraven draws cards when he does this. So, I mean, let's say for the purposes of this that we manage on both of our opponent's turns, to bite and then do that. Well, that's great. Now we're coming to our turn. We've drawn a few more cards. Kraven's already up to a 6/5 now. I mean, couldn't be a terrible idea to just run Shieldred out, have people be forced to, lay some things out, right, if we want to do that. Maybe you look into, like, reanimating some of your opponent's things, but I kind of don't mind just running Shieldred out, having another threat out. Everybody has to sacrifice. Kraven can start attacking in as a 6/5 with Trample. If somebody blocks him, maybe we draw the card if it's the highest. If not, no big deal. The point is we want Kraven to still be getting in for damage, right? Still being a threat to our opponents, even when we're not removing our opponent's things. I thought here is get the Rot Farm in, so float the mana. I think I'd probably just get something like Karsi in here. We haven't really drawn much removal. Now we could flip Shieldred over for 5. But our opponents probably aren't going to have it yet, but it does flip over into this nice... saga, and the first part of that saga is destroy target creature for each opponent. Well, that's great. We're going to pick the highest ones, and then it leads into some really interesting abilities. So Shieldred is great on the backside as well. I think I'd just get Karsi in, keep attacking. We do have a reanimate, technically, if something of somebody's really died that we really want. Otherwise, what? This wouldn't be a terrible time to flip Shieldred over if we've accomplished having an opponent with 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Otherwise, I think I just like playing the Morbid Opportunist and just get attacking. I mean, this has Menace that's going to hit pretty hard. This can attack and gain us some life back. Again, we really probably just need to draw into some things that aren't lands. We got a lot of lands this time, but that's okay. And then, we still have the Reanimate. Otherwise, just trying to get those 8 cards into an opponent's library. Unfortunately, we ran into a run of lands here, but that's okay. I think you start to see the idea of the deck kind of forming. Here on playtest number 2, we've got a 3-lander. Remember that Bridgeworks Battle is a forest on the backside if we need it to be. We see Bounty Board. We can pay 1 and put a bounty on a creature to onto our creature, and then whenever that creature with a bounty on it dies, each of its controller's opponents draw a card and gains 2 life. So kind of interesting. It does add a mana of any color, but kind of a way to pay off creatures dying. Spymaster Vault's in turn 1. Turn 2, there's the Nowhere to Run. Again, great for the future. I mean, I guess it could be an option here. We could leave it up at flash speed, and if somebody does something really scary, a really scary 2-mana creature or 1-mana creature that we really want to get rid of, it's probably worth nowhereing to run it, even though we won't pay off, right, the creature dying. I think it's easy to play a deck like this and die on the altar of like, well, if I don't get credit for it, why would I remove something? And the truth of the matter is, we need to remove a threat, even if Kraven's not out, right? And I think at the end of the day, you have to be willing to use your removal, even if you can't profit for it, so that you don't truthfully just die, right, to a threat. Here, I think we'll play the Rot Farm in, play the Bounty board, and come back with more mana. So 2, 4, 5, 6 mana. Again, we can put that bounty counter on it. We could go in with something like Death Sprout. Gix's Command could be really fun here. We either put the counters on Kraven, or I think we go with the last one no matter what, to really take advantage of trying to get the Kraven triggers. Which of the other ones we choose to do is it. Let's just say for the purpose of this, it's the counters for Kraven. And then let's say like 2 of our opponents have their highest things that we actually kill. So we do actually get some stuff there. We'll end up having to pitch here, which stinks, but it is what it is. But the point is, look at it. You have removal, 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 removal. So we have all this removal sitting in our hand waiting to go. Hollowmark Siege, interesting. It can give Kraven Menace, which is positive. But again, I like this... the fact that we should be able to crowd control even if we're not triggering Kraven. And my only worry, truthfully, with the deck is that we're going to get to the games where Kraven's just not going to be enough. People are going to remove Kraven and keep him out of the way. And my hope is that just by removing the right things, we can get our opponents in positions where they can help us out, right, with other things. But that's probably all I can do that turn. This turn, I think I'm a lot more willing to leave up removal for things. I mean, 2 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana, 2 mana, 4 mana. So I've got 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana right now. I think I'm willing to probably just attack with Kraven and then leave up the removal, leave up the fight spells. There's a lot of things here. And I think we'll be able to come back to our turn with a couple more counters on Kraven, draw on a couple cards, and then just, again, this is the cycle we want to be in. Have the removal spells, have the things. I think if there's any last thing I would consider in testing, it's how much protection do you play for Kraven? Do you just play a Snakeskin Veil and a Tamiyo's Intervention or whatever it's called? Or do you really care more about protection for Kraven in things like, I think Swiftfoot Boots and Greaves make a ton of sense, but how much protection do you play? I kind of went the route of like playing these instant speed fight spells or bite spells where like, yeah, you're going to remove Kraven, but I'm going to take something out on the way, so that you're not just going to remove Kraven for free. But I mean, I'm sure different people are going to have different philosophies on what you value. And if you value protecting Kraven more, we'll take out a couple of those and put in the protection for Kraven. And I think you'll have a better time. Here, our 2-land with Arcane Signet. Remember, Kalni Ambush is a fight spell, but it also can come as a forest on the backside. We see Kogla, we see that Meltstrider's Resolve, and then we see Professor Onyx. So really, truthfully, we just need to get up to our mana. We've got some great priests. I think I'm going to let that Kalni Ambush go, and it was great here for the Arcane Signet into the Ozolith. Just because I think we need the mana more than anything else. We need to make sure that we have access to the mana. Now, if I could Meltstride's Resolve here, maybe it ends up leading us to, destroying a key creature, drawing us a card, right? No mana again this turn, but I'm thinking maybe Bounty board and then try to Contest of Claws into, again, one of our opponent's highest creatures. If we discover, great. I mean, I think my whole goal here is just to get the counter on Kraven and draw a card. But if we do discover for like 1, great. I mean, it's not ideal. We don't have a ton of things in our deck that are 1 mana, but again, the point is you're continuing to get things out of the way. Now we're at 5 mana. We're just 1 off of Onyx and 1 off of Kogla, some of these really high up pieces. Oh no, we're at 6. I apologize. Bounty board does tap for 1. So, you could go for Onyx and get that off this turn. You could go for, Kogla. If I go for Earth Crystal, I can't get anything additional in next turn, but it could start reducing something like Kogla next turn. Onyx can also help us dig with her +1. I think I like Onyx and her -3. Let's say we get two people to, get rid of something really good, and so we draw a couple cards. There's our land for the next turn. And again, I think this playtest we're in really good shape. If somebody removes Kraven, we've still got big threats like Kogla and Vincent that are going to at least resemble some sort of threat on board, right? I think Vincent specifically is a nice kind of mini alternate commander for us that's going to become a real threat because it's going to grow as our opponent's creatures die, and then we could still get value. I think Kraven's obviously the value we want, but if he dies, hopefully we have enough things laying around to still hold the mantle. But playtest number 4 here, we're keeping a 3-laner. There's Snuff Out. Snuff Out, again, we see the swamp, so great. Innkeeper's Talent, there's the potential protection for Kraven. We see Extract, we see Will of the Absent. So we've got some interesting stuff. I'm trying to decide if it's the Rampant Growth or if it's like trying to set up Innkeeper's Talent. I think my gut tells me it's Rampant Growth. And then get Kraven out. So we're working our way up the ranks here. 5 mana here. Innkeepers is 2. Vraska's is 3. Get the counter on Kraven. Right, and now Vraska's going to really help us out once we start removing things. 6 mana. I can go bounty board into Will of the Absent. And maybe there's a world where we pick up a counter or 2 and draw a card here. Maybe Vraska also gets them back. The key thing to remember about something like Will of the Absent is it's just greatest power among creatures they control. But again, if they have creatures that are tied, they still have to pick one. But Kraven's not going to trigger, right? So it's kind of important to remember that just because you play Will of the Absent doesn't mean you're guaranteed 3 counters on Kraven and 3 cards. Like it still matters, right? What your opponents have. But again, Vraska could trigger there, getting them back under our control as treasures. And then I think I want to get this up to 2 to just protect Kraven, but I've still got 6 mana. I mean, Gix's command again, go after your opponent's creatures again, and you might even be able to chunk the tokens out, or, you hold up stuff like Overkill, Snuff Out, Shoot the Sheriff. Remember, Snuff Out we could play anytime now because we have a Swamp. But again, I think you start to see the value come between here of these removal spells being up on our opponent's turns instead of using them on our turn. Like if we're going to play anything on our turn, we're going to play Gix's command, and it would still leave up Shoot the Sheriff and Snuff Out. Or I leave the complete mana up for all of these and just try to do it at instant speed because, I think the biggest difference between doing this alt sorcery speed and doing it on your opponent's turns, right, is that on my turn, I'm only seeing what they had out previously. Now I'm waiting till their turn. If they play something new and big, then that's the time to remove it. And maybe you can be more reactive versus all sorcery speed removal where you're only, getting out what's there. And so I think that's why we want to kind of diversify and hedge our bets on having a lot of different ways to do it as opposed to just one, to best remove our opponent's things. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Kraven down in the comment section below? I really dig this deck. I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of ways to make it better. There's a lot more ways you could care about creatures dying. I really didn't get into the aristocrats much in this deck. I tried to care more about the counters, but I mean, you could add Sephiroth, Sir Conrad. There's some great aristocrats and dying trigger things that would really pair up nice with Drivnod. Now that I think about it, that'd be another area we could improve the deck and just have more fun. But I'd love to know what you think of Kraven, and I will catch y'all next week.